John Moore, the collaborator, partners with Big Tin Can to test and refine best practices, meets with practitioners, analysts, and thought leaders, and is focused on increasing the level of adoption of enablement best practices, processes, and tools across the globe.
John, welcome to Extraordinary Outcomes and the special segment that we are running on fixing the 5% conversion problem. I'm delighted to have you here. I've been looking forward to our conversation, and and welcome. I'm so happy to have you here.
Oh no, it's an honor to be here, totally, and it's such an important problem to talk about. So I'm personally excited that we have a chance to.
Wonderful, John. Why don't you, for the benefit of the few who don't know you, uh, say a bit about yourself, introduce yourself, talk about your work, and then we'll dive right in.
So my name is John Moore. I go by the brand name of the Collaborator, and as the Collaborator, I've taken it upon myself to work within the community and with the community of enablement, sales and revenue enablement, to really start to build up the level of education for practitioners and leaders from within, from taking the learnings that they have across the globe and allowing us to learn from one another. And I'm so excited, Supanjan, because we're covering 6 continents today. So today we have people representing the brand and talking to practitioners on every single continent except for Antarctica. So, if you know a penguin or two that wants to talk about enablement, introduce me, because I want to find somebody there to do it. My background's interesting. So I work as the VP of Revenue Enablement at a company called Big Tin Can. And in that position, I get the great opportunity to both lead and participate in the enablement process from a vendor perspective, where I get to talk to dozens upon dozens, if not hundreds of customers. And in my role as the collaborator, which is separate from my work at Big Ten, but they fuel one another. I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of practitioners around the globe and just see what's happening out there, and it's a wonderful position to be in. I'll briefly share with you as well. My career started off as an electrical engineer, is what I graduated from college, to do. I thought to myself, I wanted to build circuit boards and computers. And this was back in the 1980s when laptops were really just becoming a thing, when personal computing was simply starting out. And over the course of my career, I spent the first 15 years or so in the engineering side and the second 15 or so on the business side. And it's been a wonderful opportunity for me to learn a lot, to fail a lot, to succeed a lot, and just to get a lot of great experiences, which I count myself fortunate to have been able to have had.
Yeah, that's an interesting trajectory, I may say, because if you know the product well and you know the psyche of the engineer who is building it, they're not necessarily very customer focused. They're sort of uh, in the mode of chasing an idea, which is great and exciting, right?
Oh, exactly. As an engineer, and this was a long time ago, so engineers today are better, I'm sure, but I remember us always saying, this product would be fantastic if it wasn't for the customers. If we could just build the perfect product and they didn't bother us with the bugs, it would be fantastic. And you have to change that perspective on the business side, on the go-to-market side of the house.
Yeah.
But that was absolutely the viewpoint back in, long ago, long ago.
True, true. You'll be surprised how much of it still lingers in the shadows, by the way, and we'll talk about that today, I guess. Uh, so John, let's dive right in. There is this elephant in the room, which we don't want to acknowledge. We don't want to talk openly about. We say, data can be mixed, and stats can be interpreted, and this is not really true, and so on and so forth. But the fact is, B2B sales conversion is a low single digit. You slice it and dice it any which way you want. The fact is we are not converting. Why are we there, and how did we reach here, John?
For the longest time, and even today, we live in a world where we think we're far better off just throwing a huge fishing net out there and identifying everybody under the sun who may ever want to talk to us. So you still see marketing teams living by the idea of, marketing qualified lead, where it's basically anybody with a pulse that ever comes to your website, let's get them to sign up for a lead form and call them. And first off, we do such a terrible job as a global go-to-market community of really recognizing and better refining who we should be talking to. And I don't mean simply by they have a pulse, they're a CMO or anything like that. I mean, do they really have the pain that we can help them solve? Do they really have an urgent need and a problem that they need to solve? And do they have budget? We all know these basic principles of, having success, selling, solving problems, however we want to phrase it. But we still go after the idea and the concept of, I need 10,000 MQLs this quarter. And sales basically gets this huge set of leads from marketing, and they don't know what to do with it, so they don't know who to call. So they either call everybody and fail miserably and get dejected and horrified, and they don't trust marketing, or they call no one, which too often I see happen too. I'm sure you see it too, but where marketing will say, well, we put leads into the sales funnel, and they haven't called anybody in 2 months. That's because they don't know who to call anymore. The problem is terrible. So one side of the problem, I'd be curious what you think of Subhanshan as well, but part of the problem is we just throw too much garbage at the sales team. Everybody they could possibly want to talk to. So I think we need to get much more refined there. The other side of that equation, though, is even when we give the sales team the right set of leads to talk to, the right people to talk to, we've done a traditionally poor job of educating sales, of training sales, of cooperating with sales on how to most effectively identify the problems and move the right people through the funnel. And a lot of times, even if sales is only working 20 or 30 leads at a time, depending on the, a B2B, the size of those deals and how long they take, what ends up happening is they're trying to work all 25 to 30 of those leads at the same level of prioritization without enough understanding of who's really got the pain, who's really most likely to move forward today, who can I most benefit now. So there's also that lack of understanding of prioritization and how to work with the right clients at the right time. So there's just a lot of noise in the system today.
So, John, let me sort of pick on the last point you made. And the key word, the operating word there was now.
Yes.
Why is it that we are trying to, in our quest to make numbers, we are focused on quote unquote the low hanging fruit who is ready to buy now? Why this obsession with now and not the diligence of working through this and actually preparing the ground, actually planting the seed? I mean, this is nature, right? End of the day, we all know it. No seed, no tree, no fruits.
It's funny. I personally think that our hyper focus on the quarter, on this month, we're focused on talking to our board of directors every month or every quarter, and they're demanding numbers. Our shareholders, if we're a public company, they're demanding numbers, and we hit certain targets. And instead of stepping back and really trying to be a predictable business, a lot of guesswork is taking place from the top of the organization down. So when you ask a typical sales manager, hey, what's your forecast for this quarter? You don't really ask them how much business they think they're going to close. What happens most of the time is you tell them, hey, this quarter you're going to close $2 million or whatever the number is. So in their head, right from the outset, they're scrambling to figure out what they can shove into that pipeline to hit that artificially created number. In order to get to a much more predictable model, and I think it's doable, I think it's achievable, but I'm not sure that many companies will have the appetite to do it. You really need to flip the model entirely on its head. You need to start educating sales leaders on how to identify the proper sets of leads and forecast against that proper sets of leads, that proper set of leads and opportunities. And if you can teach them to do that, they can actually prepare for you a real forecast that tells you what you can actually achieve, that you can actually model your business from. And if you can scale that both horizontally across the business and then vertically as you go up, you reach a point where people can actually understand predictably what your business will do, what the levers are that you need to either add additional resources here or there, or how you modify the business outputs. And we start to move away from this quarterly chasing our tails like the dog. You got a young puppy running around the living room chasing his tail. That's what most businesses operate like today, because they're all lost in the need and the moment of trying to say, this quarter, this month, you must hit this target.
Why this Arbit target setting? So these are very intelligent people running large corporations or small corporations. These are successful people, entrepreneurs. You know, they're not like somebody just doing something. They're running people, running organization, employing people, and so on. Why is it that when it comes to setting quota, it is so arbit?
I think people fundamentally have never reached a point. I know fundamentally, the vast majority of sales leaders, the vast majority of revenue leaders simply don't understand the mechanics of their business well enough to know what's a valid target. So what do they end up doing? They simply say, add 10% to the last quarter. We achieve that by raising the prices of our products by 5%. We achieve that by demanding that our sellers go out there and find a way to cross-sell and upsell additional components. So customers are left feeling more often than not that sales isn't listening to them, that sales is simply coming to them with an agenda, because they are. They're trying to hit those targets that we set back at the office. That doesn't really go back towards the question you asked, though, of why. The why, the why, the why. I'd be curious of your experience here, Subhanshu, but to me, the best sales leaders, the best sales managers, not the best, the typical sales manager was simply a great seller, right? They knew how to close a deal. So the typical sales leader today is still somebody who is really good at closing business. And they come in, they are not taught how to be a great sales leader, how to amplify themselves by training and coaching their teams, where they could start to see the scale being met, scaling themselves out by training and coaching their team. Instead, we also accept as an industry, as a community, as a profession, that 50% of our sellers are never going to hit quota. So we do two things. We promote people that are good sellers and we don't teach them to be managers. And we accept failure as just a fact of life in how we operate. We accept that 5% is good enough. We accept that 50% of people hitting quota is good enough. We accept that 33% of people are going to turn over and leave the group every year. And we accept. I think we need to stop accepting and we need to start demanding from ourselves and from our businesses better. But we don't demand it by forcing people to hit 10% additional quota. We force it by actually taking a hard look in the mirror and saying, how do we educate ourselves to be better forecasters? How do we educate ourselves to be better problem solvers? How do we educate ourselves to be better communicators and collaborators, so when we sit down with customers, we can really ascertain and understand, is this an opportunity we can help with? And if it's not, stop trying to sell them something they don't need. Move on to the next customer. We're so focused on that quarterly number because, to me, again, boards, stock markets, that we've allowed ourselves to reach this point. And again, back to your point of why, I don't know why we refuse to accept that we can do better, but I also know for a fact that the human species is horrible when it comes to change. None of us like to accept change. We'd rather accept 5% as a good enough and simply try to get 1,000 more leads in the door than try to fix the problem. Most of us as human beings, that's how we operate.
That's a very interesting, insightful sort of take, because that is exemplified in many other facets in life. So
Oh, amen. Yes.
we believe that we have more data, right, John? We have more
We do
data
have
than
more
ever,
data.
right?
More data.
More,
Yes.
yeah, and we have technology. We have everything. We are tracking. Every time I send you a mail, John, I track you whether you have clicked on the damn thing, you have opened my PowerPoint, and I'm supposed to do better.
Amen.
What's going on? What's going on with this data?
No, it's a great question. Because, well, I'd argue a couple of things. We've been talking about machine learning and artificial intelligence for years,
Yes.
but the reality is computing power hasn't really reached the point until recently where it can actually start to process all that data and come out with some meaningful insights. We still operate, though, as businesses on technology that we've used for thousands of years. And what I mean by that is the earliest of bookkeepers back in Egypt basically had on their board checklist. We modeled that. I started my career in Lotus Development, Lotus 123. We modeled spreadsheets off of that very same model that was initially converted into books. And we still operate by giving people CSV reports. We still operate by giving people HTML reports, which are nothing more than columns. We haven't taken the step yet. Not enough people, not enough businesses have taken the step yet to say, what can I extract from that data to provide to you as an insight on what to actually do next? So instead of giving you a CSV file that makes you as a seller pour through thousands of rows to figure out who to call, why don't we just tell you who to call? We haven't yet made that next step in technology in too many places. We still are operating like we've been operating for thousands of years. And you touched upon it, you said it correctly before, Subhanshan, that this isn't just a sales problem. If you look at architecture, we build buildings the way we have for thousands of years. We're just using different materials, but we're still building them with the same kinds of columns that the Greeks and then the Romans and all of those have done. As a species, we like to reproduce what we've done in the past, as opposed to saying, how do we do this differently based upon what we have? So we need to take those petabytes of data, those petabytes of data, and actually start turning them into actionable next steps. And very few companies are doing that today. And until we reach that point, you're going to do nothing more with that data than simply overwhelm people with the volume of data that you have. In my background from a learning perspective, there's this, for long times, LMSs have worked with these things called SCORM packages. And then came along this thing called XAPI. And the promise of XAPI is to something you touched upon earlier. It can track everything. I can get thousands of pieces of data about every single move off the screen, on the screen, tap of the video player. What good does it do me? It's a database versus carrying thousands of data points that unless you tell me what to do with that, I don't need that much data.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think we've drowned ourselves with the amount of data, and we're still trying to figure out how to extract real insight from it.
Yeah. And I think somehow it is linked to our need to do it now, this quarter. And somehow it gives us a false sense that this additional data will help me nail that plus 10% from last quarter. I have a sense of that's what
Oh,
sort
I
of.
agree. I agree. We're all talking about business intelligence. We're all talking about data-driven insight, but none of us or few of us actually understand A, how to interpret the data we have today, much less do we have systems that are interpreting it for us to give us some basic assumptions to work from. We're very poor as a species of trying to differentiate between change in the environment. So most of us go through life, all of us go through life because we're built, our brains are wired that way to ignore 90% of what's going on around us.
Yeah,
So what makes us think that we can give somebody a spreadsheet and expect them to pick the needle out of the haystack? That's where we need to take the machines and have them present us with where to start focusing and then let the humans analyze and go from there. We're still just we're not there yet. We're not there yet. And some of it
absolutely.
is the need for the moment. I think some of it is the need for the moment. Here's a quick report. Go figure it out. Go figure out who to call. But some of it's just we haven't recognized the limitations of our own brains and try to really serve them as much as just serve the technology.
I think a sea change has happened between the person you are selling to 20 years back and the person who is buying today. Even the even if you talk of the procurement professional, the procurement professional he is now seeking a seat at the table as a part of the CXO clan, just like the CIOs did 20 years back.
Yeah.
The CPOs are looking at the seat because they're no longer just negotiators who are there to beat your price down. They're subject matter experts. They actually understand what their end users within the organization need and so on. Where do you think is the disconnect? Why are we not understanding that the buyers are really controlling this process? It's no longer in the sales control.
I think there's a struggle going on that I see. People people acknowledge and recognize that the buyer's controlling. But there's two schools of thought that I see going on out there. There's a group in the community that feels like they're in control now. The buyer's in control. But if we just do this and that, we can take control back. So there's a school of belief there's a school out there of belief that says I can wrestle control back from the buyer. Ha! And then we can go back to the way we were 30 years ago and life will be good. Well, the reality is life wasn't good 30 years ago. Our memories are simply poor about that. But the reality is then there's a much smaller school, and I do think unfortunately it's a much smaller school of thought that says, guess what? The buyer's in control. Let's accept that and figure out how we actually better partner, collaborate, and communicate across the buying teams across their to really recognize their needs at an individual level as well as the corporate level. I mean, we all understand that when you go to sell some complex piece of B2B software to someone, maybe you're talking to the buyer, maybe you're talking to a champion, maybe you're talking to one of the decision makers. While they may or may not agree on the problem that you're trying to solve for their business, they also have distinctly different problems that they're hoping for you to solve that are separate from that big line item that they're paying for.
Yeah.
They have political motivations, they have personal motivations, they have goals that they're getting bonused upon that are different from this one. And in fact, oftentimes they're competing priorities. So understanding that the buyer's in charge and that all of these buyers are in charge, it's not just one person, that's an overwhelming and mind-blowing thing for people to start to embrace. And that small group of people and companies that are embracing it are going to help us all get there. But again, it goes back to how do we deal with change as a human species? We don't want to deal with change. We want to sit back on the floor like a 5-year-old who just got their toy taken away and pout and cry, as opposed to really trying to rationally step back and understand how we do this. So I don't know if I answered your question, Supanjan. I kind of got on a preachy kind of set there, but I think a lot of people are understanding, but few are willing to allow the buyers to be in control. There's still the too many people trying to wrestle that control back as opposed to just flowing with it.
Yeah, I guess so. And as I said earlier, those who recognize it's like climate change, you know. Uh, you can choose to say, yes, actually, there is something happening. There is something
Yeah,
called global warming. There is something called the buyer taking control. Or you can say, no, this is all false propaganda.
yeah. It's really easy to deny. It's really easy to say 30 years ago was better. Let's find a way to get back there. It's much harder on anything in life to say, okay, that's where we are, and that's not changing. And to embrace that and find a way to work within that system to create a better system. That's a
Absolutely.
much more challenging mindset for most people to accept.
Yeah.
And I think that's why progress is often slow.
What do you prescribe? What is your prescription to them?
I'll tell you what some of the stuff we're doing in our business that I think are smart moves forward. We're accepting that it's not a quantity game, that the game is not about getting 10,000 leads thrown into at the sellers. We're recognizing that businesses need to do a much better job of identifying the customers, the prospects that are in market that have a need we can solve, and having conversations with those people, not the entire world. So first off, I think you need to recognize that that's a fundamental piece of the equation. The other piece of it that I think is so critical for businesses to look at, and I know I live and breathe in this world, is how do we better educate, train, and change the mindsets of our sellers to recognize that they can't wrestle control from the seller or from the buyer. They need to actually seek lean into that, in fact, much like in judo, in martial arts and judo, the idea is not to actually take control from the person, it's to work with their momentum and all that. We need to lean into it and find ways to cooperate with those people to custom tailor solutions that meet their needs within confines of what you can do, and seek to recognize across that entire buying group and that entire buying committee, both pre-sale and also post-sale, what all those dynamics are, and make sure that you're looking to satisfy each and every decision maker's needs, as well as the businesses along the journey. And I think the more you educate not simply the sales teams, but your customer success teams, your support teams, your marketing teams, on how to think and respect that, the better you're going to be able to move past that 5% number, which is terrible and unacceptable, to something much better. Now, it doesn't happen overnight. And the reality is, you're always going to have naysayers. You're always going to have people in your organization that says, this can't work. Businesses have to decide, and the leaders of those businesses have to decide, if you're willing to live with people preventing progress. You have two choices. You have three choices. You can educate them to come along about why it's important. You can let them do their own thing and destroy the progress and move forward. Or you can simply help them find an opportunity at a company that doesn't care about getting better. I choose educate, and if you can't educate, just say goodbye. It's okay. We don't all have to take the same journey together. We certainly don't all have to travel in the same car. So, but I know I jumped right to the prescription, which is you asked me. I also think fundamentally before that, Supanjan, we have to say to ourselves, which is your point exactly that I love right from the beginning, 5% is not good enough. We have to say that to ourselves. That's the number, and it's not good enough.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. John, this was fantastic, and these conversations, leave me. Uh, I know we can talk about this for a long time, and I honestly feel that we should get back and potentially, unpack each of these silos, not only for ourselves, but for our profession, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot there. And I know, I'm taking a very narrow slice because in terms of what I do around revenue enablement and enablement, but each and every one of these silos are so critical to unpack. And then not simply in isolation, but then all those interconnections with each other,
Yes.
both where they exist today and where they should exist tomorrow.
Yeah.
There's a lot there.
Yes, and we should get back and we should continue this conversation.
Anytime, my friend, anytime.
John, thank you so much. I really really thank you for coming on the show. Thank you.